Central Time. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us here. My name is Mitch Barloga, and I'll get into introductions momentarily. But you are part of our micromobility webinar. This is being put on today by ourselves at the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission with partners, South Shore Clean Cities. And we want to thank both Carl Lysick and Lori Cagle of South Shore Clean Cities for helping us out with this presentation. We certainly hope you're able to learn something today as we were in preparing it. So let's move forward here. So on today's agenda, pretty basic stuff. We're going to do some pretty much 101. If you don't know what a micromobility is, you've been kind of, things happen fast in this society. Technology keeps moving forward. We'll kind of get you up to speed. How do we get here? We'll talk about some implementation issues that are starting to arise throughout the region and country, policy discussion, and then we will have questions and answers. What I would like to inform everybody on the webinar of is your ability to ask questions during the webinar. We have a chat box. You should be able to have a chat box. If you look at your menu, you'll see a chat icon. At any time during this presentation, whenever the need arises or the questions brew up within you, please get them out, put them in the chat, and we will read those at the end of this webinar, the question and answer part. And if you're on a phone, I know some might be on a telephone here, and you have no ability to enter the chat, you can email me, Mitch Barloga, that's mbarloga@nerpc.org, mbarloga@nerpc.org. Again, anytime during this webinar to ask questions that you may have. Okay, so the presenters are yours truly, I'm Mitch Barloga. I am the active transportation manager for NERPC, and my esteemed colleague, Carl Lysick, who is the executive director of South Shore Clean Cities. So we will have our contact information at the end of this webinar as well. I would also like to remind you as one more cleaning item, we are recording this webinar and we will have this posted pretty much today on our NERPC YouTube page. So you'll be able to access that whenever you wish to catch up on what you may have learned today. So I would like to get this right out of the way. For everybody who would like to know what micromobility is, this is not it, okay? Yes, technically it might be, but we're not talking about small vehicles and people riding them, okay? So good, we got that joke aside. Let's move on. When we talk about micromobility, let's keep it easy. Let's go right to the source, the dictionary, okay? MERRIAM-WEBSTER says, transportation over short distances provided by lightweight, usually single-person vehicles such as bicycles and scooters, and of course all of those emblems showing you the wide range of micromobility options, including, yes, your own 2 feet, which speaks for itself. What we will focus on in this webinar are vehicles, shared use and for-profit vehicles that are now starting to emerge throughout this region. We are not talking complete streets. We're not going to be going into infrastructure. We do that quite a bit here at NERPC. We have a living streets policy that has been guiding development in this region for many years. Of course, that involves trails, bike lanes, cycle tracks, etc., sidewalks for that matter as well. We understand we have to have the infrastructure in place. We only have about an hour here, so we want to make sure we focus in on the actual issues of micromobility. So moving ahead. Let's talk about an overview to micromobility. How did we get here? How are these people all over the streets in these different vehicles? Well, we all know micromobility, okay? It's come in many forms over the last century or so. Talk about the quadricycle there in the upper left-hand corner, and we have even the snow sled here that they used in the Scandinavian countries to get around. Scooters, the earliest scooter to the upper right-hand corner. Of course, the venerable bicycle there in the lower left, and we have a safety bicycle, and of course, the giant penny farthing, which was actually in use for a little bit until it was kind of like, how do we get off of this thing or even onto it? We've had bicycles and other tricycle machinery that's been sheltered. And of course, right there on the lower right-hand side, the skateboard. Skateboard is also counted for micromobility, and roller skates for that matter, which I did not show here. I could just show any movie in the late 70s and there's probably a roller skate in it. But that aside, these are what we have considered micromobility throughout the ages. Now, what comes up to our modern understanding of micromobility when it comes down to sharing it, when it comes down to actually utilizing it as a true alternate transportation vehicle. This all started in 1965. It was called the White Bicycle Plan, and there is its Dutch pronunciation, which I will not take the time to chop up. So if you look online, this is what you'll find out. It was very, very organic, to say the least. These were bicycles painted white, unlocked and placed throughout Amsterdam, free to use, okay? The idea was, of course, to promote bicycles as a non-polluting form of transportation, something that we gladly do today at NERPC and at South Shore Clean Cities. It was initiated by an activist group. If you actually look at the activist group, it's an anarchist group, but that aside, again, it was the idea that we shouldn't be tied down to our automobiles. There should be other ways of going about. And like with any good idea, that's too good to be true. Within a month, most of these bikes were stolen and the rest were found in the many canals around Amsterdam. So nice try. Let's give this another whirl. So let's try it again. Now, as the years gone by and people kind of understood the human nature a little better, we decided over time to start locking these up to docks. And this began up with a payment system in the 1990s. Kiosks with these docks started to emerge slowly through the world, and companies such as that we may have heard of, Zagster, of course, Divvy being the bicycle company in Chicago, B-Cycle, which has a number of contracts throughout the world, and Ofo, which is a Chinese manufacturer. These proliferated in major urban areas really throughout the world. Now, some of those companies, one that I was thankful enough to take part in, offer electric bicycle options. Now, electric bicycle options are becoming more prolific, as we'll talk about momentarily. But when I first rode these in 2016 in Copenhagen, it was quite the eye-opener, especially when they had, a digital system on the bike that you could, Google map yourself throughout the environment. Quite amazing. So by 2016, about 1,000 cities worldwide had this bicycle sharing program in place. And now we have a fourth generation, which includes dockless bicycles based on GPS technology. And again, I'll dive into that momentarily here. So the new kinds on the block, okay? As we have gone farther into the world of micromobility and the ability of electric generated vehicles and their capacity, we have seen other doors open up for these vehicles, and there's been quite a bit of success with them. The most popular by far, and I'll explain that momentarily, are these motorized scooter sharing systems. The scooters shown there, the Lyft variety on the right-hand side. Now, these electric kick scooters have proliferated internationally since 2018, pretty much for good reason. Ease of placement, no permanent docks, quite lightweight, okay? And they also use your smartphone liberally to use and monitor for rental purposes. And of late, again, because of the human nature and the fact that these scooters have found themselves throughout the area, kind of littered sporadically, GPS is now helping users not only find them, but also governing the range that they can be rode to. As an example, when I was in Indianapolis last month, I took a scooter and I got close to one of these no-go zones. Actually, it was the government complex around the state capitol. And all of a sudden my scooter went down to like 1 mile an hour and it was flashing saying, you're in a no-go zone. You got to get it out of here. I couldn't park the scooter there. I had to actually practically walk it out of there because it was going so slow. And so it definitely was a very good deterrent. And this, of course, would help out if people decided, hey, why don't we just take the scooter for a 100-mile ride? Well, unless you have more money than sense, you wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, they won't allow you to get away that far from your home base, which again, we have to keep ahead of the human nature. There's other electric vehicles that are now burgeoning. We see electric mopeds that are out for hire. We have the Lime variety here on the left. And when I was in Austin, Texas, about a year ago, they had maybe as many as 3 of these moped vendors out on the streets. So that was quite amazing. And I did take a couple for a ride. And now these one wheels, what the kids are riding these days, is crazy kids. I was on the trail last year and it was at twilight, and about 3 or 4 of these things just they float by you. I mean, they're going so smoothly. And I just felt like I entered another state of being, so to speak. I'm like, what's going on here? I was looking at that. And of course, sure enough, it was all over the internet, because we're always a step behind the internet, and talked about the one wheels. Well, the one wheels are a personal system. They're not out for rent right now. As you can imagine, that would be kind of awkward. How do you rent these things out? If you think scooters are easy to throw around the city, these things would be even worse. So right now, these are more for your personal transportation needs or recreation needs. As you can see, this looks like a college campus environment, and I'm sure they're going to start proliferating here. Just a sidebar, I remember when my son was dealing with Heelys about 15 years ago, the wheels and the heels of the shoe, and he got that down to a science. This must be the next generation of Heelys. A little bit more expensive. Okay, who pays for this? All right, there's many different ways that companies work with municipalities to pay for these vendor-based, pay-based systems, sharing systems through communities. We have the user fees for memberships. One-time trips are most popular items, especially if you are a visitor to a particular community. These people here are riding on a bridge in Pittsburgh. Okay, that's great. Find a scooter, find a moped, or even a bicycle and take off. Okay, of course, they're best used for shorter trips. You don't want to get too far on these. They do get a bit pricey. Other sponsorships have been able to be secured. Grants have been able to be secured. I know that Blue Cross, major health provider, they provided for the Divvy system in Chicago. So that's been great. And public financing, of course. Many municipalities have subsidized the placement of these systems to, again, help people enjoy their cities. Of course, that's usually a little bit more commonplace when you have cities and towns, well, most like cities, where there are destinations and places to go, and there is a kind of a tourism bump. As for more utilitarian purposes, we really haven't seen public financing come to the forefront yet. So let's talk about the benefits of micromobility. We can all agree that they are cheaper than transit in some cases, but mostly transit and definitely a car rental or taxi. So, and if you're just wanting to get a few blocks one way or the other, maybe spending a couple of dollars on a quick scooter ride, that's well within your budget. And of course, if you're new to an area, what a great way to actually visit that environment you're in. It's great for tourism. When you are in, as I say, I keep pointing to Indianapolis because they are now totally bought in on the scooters, and you see them zipping all around the city now. And of course, they also have the Pacer Share bicycle share system. So you see those going around as well. So just a great way to see an area that you're not familiar with. It eliminates the need for vehicle ownership. If you live in a big city and there is transit options, and then you can kind of supplement those transit options, those last mile options, and we'll talk about that momentarily in Carl's presentation. This is a great way of making and bridging that transportation gap. You're not attached to your vehicle. You're not attached to your scooter, to your moped, to your bicycle. You just drop it off at the dock and, hey, it's been nice knowing you, and you move on with your life, okay? It's a great option for occasional riders. Some people don't want to put the money into a bicycle or a scooter or what have you. And there's a lot of people like that. There's people that I know in my office that will ride 3,000 or 4,000 miles a year on a bicycle. I ride a few hundred 100 miles myself. Hopefully I'll get to 100 years doing that, but I ride a few hundred miles myself, but some people are not nearly as attached. Healthier than driving or using transit. I mean, transit is very effective and we promote it, but you are just sitting still or standing still. It is fun zipping around a community. It really is. You see the scooters really come to life after hours. The youth are just using it, going back and forth. Kind of a social thing for them. But again, it is enjoyable to get around on them. And a vast majority of trips, and I mean vast majority of trips taken by anybody, you, me, anybody, are under 6 miles. okay? And a scooter can get you, and a bicycle can get you around 6 miles quite readily, okay? So, here's that graph regarding how many trips are taken by anybody vehicle-wise. This is put out by U.S. Department of Energy. You can see nearly 60% of all trips are less than 6 miles. And actually 50% of those trips are under 3 miles if you really want to start parsing down the numbers. Okay, very readily accessible by bicycle, by even walking in many cases. So these micromobility options have really helped out in that regard in that last mile. This is an interesting chart, if you can follow along with me, about adoption of these new micromobility services throughout the country. And you can see here, you see some familiar logos. Okay, we've heard of Zipcar. Of course, we've heard of Uber and Lyft. In fact, many of you have used them, but you can see their adoption. Zipcar, the car sharing services, in 18 years, okay, it's only taken about 16% of the adoption rate, and it took 18 years to get there. You can see Uber and Lyft was a little quicker than that. In about 7 years, it took about 39%. But look at scooters. In less than a year, they have over nearly 4% in just less than a year. People are really gravitating to these scooters, again, because of their ease of use and their ease of finding them. I mean, you can find a scooter almost on every corner in a major urban area. This is another chart that helps strengthen the fact that scooters are starting to take over. You can see bicycle share in the blue there, and you can see dockless is coming up now because, again, dockless is being that. Just you can park your bike in designated areas without worrying about a kiosk. Everything can be done on your smartphone, but you can see the growth very slowly, very gradually. But look at that shoot up in scooter share in 2018. That was the big year where scooters hit, kind of hit the public consciousness in a big way. Okay. And that wasn't exactly a good thing, as I will talk about right now. So here are the not so good issues regarding bicycle share and primarily the scooters. Okay. So first of all, the bike share frames for those B-cycle frames, they can be very bulky and pretty heavy to use. And so sometimes that can be a little awkward. They're not available year round. We do see them proliferate in cold climates, but a lot of them also get put away for the year too. Scooters, for that matter, will have a very hard time getting around in winter. However, bicycle share is a product that can probably stay the course year round. They are rented year round in Chicago. Chicago does plow their trails, does of course plow their streets where bicycle lanes are prevalent. So you can get around the city of Chicago in the wintertime on a bicycle. Just got to make sure you're out there when it's not all icy or snowy. Safety is an issue. And going along with that, helmets are not provided. Carl will be talking about this momentarily in bigger detail. Docking a bike can be a chore. Now, of course, with the dockless revolution upon us, this is probably going to be an old complaint, much like having to dial on a rotary phone, okay? But in this case, docking a bike can be a big chore, and I found that out a few times when I rode to a particular location and there were no bike docks. So I had to ride another block or two over with my bicycle to find a dock. That, of course, increased my usage fee and also my anxiety level, as you can imagine. What am I going to do with this bike? So straying too far is costly. Like I mentioned before, if you really want to take a long cruise on a scooter or bicycle, if it allows you to, in many cases it won't now, but if it does, get ready to pay. I mean, those short distances are very affordable, and the longer you ride, not so much. And then litter. I love this this tweet here, the 2018 remake of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Yes, indeed. I'll talk about how this kind of came to be, where the scooter revolution hit in a very big and unplanned way. And again, another chime in for planning came in really handy when we had to work retroactively when these scooters started hitting the ground. So let's talk a little bit about just our region in Northwest Indiana. The primary focus of this webinar are our member communities in Lake Porter and LaPorte counties and how this has been dealt with. We've had 2 micromobility experiments, bike sharing experiments for that matter, in Valparaiso and Gary, and the Miller section. They use WEBSTER. To my knowledge, they're both defunct today. There might be a couple of bikes left in Valparaiso, but if it is not defunct, it is significantly reduced from its original startup. I think that was back in 2017. The reason is simple. The region communities are not geographically suited for these dock-based sharing systems. We just don't have the geography for it. We just cannot justify to any person to use a bike and dock it at another location. We are not a heavily urbanized area. These dock systems work so much better in those dense urbanized areas, your Chicago's, your Indianapolis's, et cetera, et cetera. Our region is quite spread out. We do not have a central downtown area. We have many smaller downtown areas. So on that note, the electric scooters and these e-bikes, dockless e-bikes, are becoming a much better fit for our region, and you're seeing that starting to take shape. First came about just a couple months ago. Last month, we're still in August, right? So last month in July, the city of Gary executed a contract with the Bird Ride e-scooters to have them placed throughout their city and with different standards and policies. Again, we'll touch into that on the back end of this presentation. And other companies are beginning to sniff around for potential markets in the region. It pretty much necessitated the reason why we're having this webinar now, because again, as you saw what happened with the scooters back in 2018, things happen fast. And so we want to make sure you understand what's going on, and hopefully this could be of some help to you going forward. So with that said, I am now going to pass this presentation to my esteemed colleague, Carl Lisek. I will stop sharing, and Carl will now begin his presentation. Carl, it is all yours.
Well, Mitch, thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon to some folks. Great to be here.
And I
Mitch,
think Carl might be muted.
Nope. I am not muted.
You are not muted, Carl. You're fine.
Okay, very good. So thank you for that, Mitch, and welcome everybody. Just want to take this opportunity to tell you a little more, bit more about South Shore Clean Cities. Again, I'm Carl Lisek, the Executive Director. This kind of describes what South Shore Clean Cities is. We've been around since 1999. This program was first established by NIPSCO and NERC back in 1999. So with that, I want to talk about transportation. And so transportation drives our nation's economy. So each year vehicles transport 11 billion tons of freight, about $35 billion worth of goods each day, and move people more than 3 trillion vehicle miles. So sustaining our economic prosperity requires transportation, but our nation's current transportation system is energy intense. So the transportation sector accounts for about 30% of the total US energy needs and 70% of the US petroleum consumption. So additionally, the US household, us, our families spend about 15% of our total family expenditures on transportation. This makes it the most expensive spending category after housing. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I really want to talk about also is some of the changes that have occurred here in South Shore Clean Cities. So we now report to the National Renewable Energy Lab in Denver. So we are working and receiving training for what we call future fit technology, like mobility systems, which includes micromobility, drones, mobility energy productivity, curb management like EV charging, integrated modeling and simulation, connected and automated vehicle controls and testing, and all of these things that we were not privy to from our previous contract with the Department of Energy in Argonne is now coming to fruition. So as we look at this micro-mobility, all this looks scary because it's changed. However, that's why we need to work together with NERC and understand the technologies while being educated and providing insight to national and worldwide best management practices. So similar to the onslaught of new technologies as electric vehicles, micro-mobility provides a tremendous opportunity if it is utilized in collaboration with transit and other forms of transportation. So first mile, last mile, vetting many of these transportation opportunities are what NERPC and our NERPC Green Fleet program can assist your community with. So in an effort not to work in silos, you can see with the various case studies that have been assembled here, the biggest gap with e-scooters is when they are not, what we've seen the biggest benefit with e-scooters, as I said, and as Mitch alluded to, was that when they're paired with existing transit systems to fill these first mile and last mile gaps. So that's when you get the most use, and you see the most use in the way that really helps with emission reductions in replacing traditional gas-powered vehicles. So safety is a concern, obviously, as Mitch alluded to. So some of the case studies that we've assembled here, and these will be available at the end so you can review them. So City of Portland, Oregon reported 10 scooter-related ER visits per week during the pilot program in 2018. So this study discovered 90% of users that ride these scooters don't wear helmets. Another safety issue is a program that was enacted with the city of Santa Monica, California. Prohibits e-scooters on sidewalks and requires speeds to be reduced to 5 miles per hour, such as parks and promenades. So similar to Northwest Indiana with our national parks, our state parks, and the many communities, this potentially could be another safety issue for all of us. So emission reductions, again, things that we're seeing here, implementing and filling these transportation gaps is what we see. Again, working with our transit agencies, our new trains and things like that. We see this as really as a huge opportunity with the first mile and last mile gaps with public transportation. So there's been a lot of pilot programs that are going to be, again, at the end of our presentation here that you can refer to, but Denver requires e-scooters to be available at transit and bus stops, and operators must relocate these scooters to these locations each day. So what we see, e-scooters for transit access by challenging, they become very challenging. So only 37% of the respondents reported using e-scooters in connection with transit, occasionally less than once a week, and 44% reported that never using these e-scooters to complement their transit rides. So again, as we said, this is another case study that was done in Boston, Massachusetts, the first and last mile transit connections. The MPO, similar to NERPC and its partners, agree that these services, they must be especially useful in solving first and last mile transit connectivity in suburban communities. And the big thing too is collecting and integrating data. So tremendous amount of data as we talk about these scooters and the shared mobility providers in the region. And so what are we going to do with this data, and integrating this data into our regional travel demand models and related planning tools? So, shared mobility and travel behavior research has shown it's because of the uncertainty of the transportation network companies, bike sharing service and electric scooter startups may ultimately influence travel behavior and overall performance of the multimodal system. So MPOs like NERPC and our partners are focusing on research, coordination, and technical assistance that may inform future innovations and investments related to the shared mobility. So another great study was this Los Angeles case study. So again, you can read this, but the goals of this program were the dynamics of the emerging marketplace of private mobility operators. So they learned to collaborate with peer cities and to develop best practices. And that's really what we're doing with NERPC here in Northwest Indiana, is developing these best management practices. And as we gain insight to mobility trends through the use of this data. So again, as we integrate other electric charging stations and electric mobility, we think this is going to be very important to the future of Northwest Indiana. So, addressing these concerns over equity, safety, the accessibility of various modes of transit. Our plans with NERPC with NERPC's leadership is to develop a program that can foster innovation and prepare for onboarding new and anticipated modes of transportation in the future. And again, I think on a daily basis, we're hearing about all these new forms of transportation. And again, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. So again, just a lot of opportunities are being thrown, not just to NERC and to Indiana, but throughout the United States. So very interesting is on the Los Angeles case studies, they talked about the various rides that were interpreted here. I think some of the biggest things, again, with the Clean Cities program is what it meant to savings equal to over 202,000 gallons of gasoline, which is tremendous. So this was, this was operating in 6 different markets. And 44% of the riders reported driving less often with the use of these mobilities, so which equated to 1/3 less of trips. So again, if you remember anything, I think one of the things that we want to point out, so micromobility safety issues, we must anticipate those, including in all of our planning. And so that's very important. As we talk about emission offsets, they can only take place when e-scooters or bikes are replacing traditional gasoline-powered vehicles in our communities. And then pairing the e-micromobility with existing transit systems provides, as we talked, the first and last mile solutions and our subsequent emission reductions. And so again, I think one of the things that, again, working with NERC, we want to really talk about, the things that are available to us nationally. So learn from others who have gone through the process. And so please turn to NERC and South Shore Clean Cities for additional guidance and resources. So again, there's my information. Mitch, let's turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Carl. Really appreciate that oversight. Thank you very much. And also for South Shore Clean Cities being part of this webinar today. Great to have that information and those important issues that we need to keep clarifying and working on. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again here. Hopefully I picked the right screen. If I do, you should see a plethora of kick scooters. So now let's get into some meat and some help on creating policies and dealing with those. So first and foremost, when we talk about this and prepping policies and prepping reactions to the coming wave of micromobility, obviously you need to get in front of surprise deployments. And we'll talk about that sad issue in a moment here. You need to think about utilizing pilot programs to consider right-of-way policy, cost structure, sustainability, and opportunities to work with different companies. Some communities have kept their contracting to 1 or 2 communities. Some have been a little bit more liberal with other companies that they decide to bring in. As I had mentioned previously, the city of Gary decided to execute a contract with Bird. There has to be at least 5 or 6 scooter sharing systems out there. Once you bring one on board, they're all going to start knocking on your door. Just keep that in mind. So obviously we have a safety consideration as well, as Carl had mentioned, to keep that in mind as you go forward. Develop a plan and agreement for trip data. You want to make sure that there is good usership on these scooters, on these shared vehicles, so they're worth the headache that they might bring from an administrative perspective. I believe that they can be. I believe micromobility can be a very positive development for any particular area, especially if it's tailored to the scale of that particular community. But these are kind of situations where pilot programs come in very handy to kind of measure what that scale would be. Reevaluate bike infrastructure, very important to do, especially when you are trying to bring aboard a bicycle share or even a scooter share system. They're both going to utilize trails and bike lanes and cycle tracks, and in some cases sidewalks if it's young enough users. And you want to make sure that those systems are in place. I mean, it kind of goes back to the old adage about if you build it, they will come. Well, if you build it right, they will use it more often. Many cases, sidewalks end where they shouldn't. Streets are quite dangerous for bicycles, much less scooters. It's just not a very safe environment out there. You could live a mile away from your grocery store or your or your drugstore or your gas station, and you would never want to get there by bike or by foot. That's a problem. These are things that communities have to think about, especially if you want people zipping around your communities accessing different destinations. We need to focus on equity and make sure that these systems are available for all people throughout the entire region, no matter what their economic status might be, and also being proactive about learning from other cities. Thankfully, many other cities have employed these. Of course, at the scale of our region here in Northwest Indiana, it is not nearly as prolific. Again, we only saw the Great Revolution hit back in 2018 with these scooters. And as I had mentioned before, the docked bicycle shared systems are just not cutting it at communities of our scale. So it's one of those things that we're going to hopefully get a better understanding of as the years go by. So getting back to one of these problems, when they first hit back in 2018, a great statement here. If you never knew where it came from this Admiral, Grace Hopper. It's often easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. In fact, it probably is easier to ask for forgiveness. And the scooter companies were more than happy to employ this adage when they attacked San Francisco back in 2018. This is when public officials knew we had a problem. And it wasn't Houston, it was San Francisco, okay? And we had not one, but maybe 5 or 6 of these scooter companies decide, hey, look, they have just dropped all these scooters out and we need to get ahead of the curve. So we need to drop scooters too. And of course, what you had is what you see in that picture, pretty much all over San Francisco, different companies. Again, no rules, no regs, just they dropped them there. And, they just depended on the good nature of human beings to, put them back in the correct spot. And well, that turned out as expected. So 2,000 public complaints happened within the couple months that they hit the streets. And then by June, just a scant 3 months after they were deployed, the city went around and got rid of them all. They just pulled them up. They said, that's enough, stop it. And they finally looked it over. And they were, of course, the guinea pig. So they had to figure out, okay, what are we doing here? And they ended up just giving the contract out to 2 companies. And those companies are now under an application, annual permit fees, and they cover the implementation costs of their deployment throughout the city. So unfortunately, this was, reactive planning, so to speak, not planning and development, more like reaction and panic. So, but they were able to catch up to it. And thankfully for all of us, we've been able to learn from that going forward. Now, when I talk about learning going forward, you're not going to learn everything you need to know from this webinar. This webinar hopefully gets you kind of motivated, get you focused that micromobility is here, and it could be at your community's corner very shortly. There are 2 wonderful documents that I will point you to, and I also want to thank Carl and Lori for finding these as well and using them in their presentation. NACDO, and they have a guideline for regulating shared mobility. And then we have the NLC, the National League of Cities, Mobility in Cities, Micromobility in Cities, the History and Policy Overview. It talks exactly about what I have been addressing, what Carl had addressed earlier, and it gets into far more detail about how to develop policy, how to handle micromobility in your community. These are our go-to guides. So I can't stress it enough to please access both of these guides. Again, this presentation will be recorded. It'll be put on YouTube on our NERPC YouTube page, simply NIRPC, and you'll find our YouTube page with the logo that is behind me, and you'll be able to access this presentation and find out about these documents. If you just simply type these titles in, Google will take you right there. So let's talk a little bit. This could be an entire session of itself, just regulating micromobility. So let's talk about 2 phases of regulation. Okay, the first one is dealing with the person on the vehicle itself, and then talking about how we actually regulate the vendors who want to populate through your community. So talking about your individual citizens and visitors, the main issue remains handling electric powered vehicles on non-motorized facilities, trails, sidewalks, bike lanes, etc. Okay, Indiana law does set guidance on this. They say you don't need an insurance or a permit for your e-bike or for your scooter. However, the motor has to be less than 750 watts. How do you measure that? Well, I think most scooters, if not most bicycles, do run under that amount. Some bicycles are a bit more juiced than that. You just have to be careful. I think the main indicator of all this is basically keeping your speed to no more than 20 miles an hour when you're on a trail. Scooters can get up to that speed. The good ones can. I think the major average for scooter speed is about 15 to 17 miles an hour. But for bicycles, you can ramp that puppy up to 25 and 30 if you care to. And you really don't want to be going down a non-motorized trail at such speeds. The one wheels that I showed you earlier, I mean, those couldn't get up about 15 miles an hour. But regardless, you must keep a regulated speed on there. So no one under 15 can ride these vehicles. That's stated in Indiana law. And any person under 18 must wear a helmet. And as I say, good luck with that. When you do rent out the vehicles, helmets are usually not provided. And in many cases, people do not wear helmets at all. But we do recommend by state law that people under 18, please protect those growing noggins for obvious reasons. And then the last one, which I think every trail manager on this webinar is very interested in, is how are they allowed on trails? Well, they are. They're allowed on trails. They're allowed on sidewalks, in fact, but they are controlled by local laws, local regulations. Okay, so let's take an example. I believe a community can actually impose a speed limit. They've done this in other communities. Carmel coming to mind. They're north of Indy, where they have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on their trails, and they're enforced. They do have the officers are sitting there with their radar guns on the bike trails, issuing warnings and tickets for repeat offenders. So those are options that can be employed. And again, these guides that I had mentioned earlier can talk about some other strategies that the municipalities could employ to kind of keep these vehicles from becoming an annoyance. And again, many of them are self-powered. The thing about the e-bicycles is that you have to ride the bike. You can't just sit there. I mean, you can get it into kind of a pure motorized state, but you're going to drain the battery out. Usually you have to keep pedaling to keep the battery fresh. It will make the hills level out wonderfully, but you got to keep pedaling. The scooters are another story. You just simply, and the one wheels, you're not exactly moving around on those. You're not doing any physical activity, but again, that's where the speed limit does come in handy. Let's talk about some of the vendor policies. I'm going to just keep this slide up for a little bit because it does point out what you need to work on when you have a vendor in mind. So Bird, Lime, OFO, these places start calling you up and you're like, whoa, what do I do? This is what you have to be ready to talk about when you do approach or when these companies approach you. Okay, you have to figure out, how many of these vehicles do you want in your community? Okay, and then you have to talk about, the trips. You have performance-based fleet expansion. Okay, they might want to say, okay, we'll start. Again, our communities are not going to have 600 bikes, but they might have 50. They might have 10. Okay, and of course, companies want more bikes to marry, right? More bikes, more money, right? Okay, but you have to. This is where your performance-based measures come in to kind of regulate the fleet expansion of those systems. Okay, parking. Obviously, we have to make sure that these are parked in a way that they're not interfering with our local right-of-ways. They're not interfering with people's access. Of course, people with disabilities need to get around comfortably as well. So we have to make sure that those are maintained. Vehicle distribution. Okay, we don't want all of them in one area. We need to know where we're going to put them and when we're going to put them there. Fees, of course. What are the fees for these vehicles going to be? And of course, all these companies have a set fee. And then you as a community can sit there and be like, well, that's great for Chicago, but we're Griffith, we're Valparaiso, we're Gary. We can only afford so much. Well, that's what you can work on in the negotiations with your vendors and work that out. The vendors, they're out there to make they want to make money, right? They want to get their coin, but at the same time, you got to work with your own community. This is where equity comes in. You don't want to price different people out of it. You want to make sure we can make this an equitable system that all people can use, enjoy, and take advantage of. And again, we get back to data and reporting. And we want to make sure that all the companies are understanding that they do need to provide data. Okay. And there's all sorts of different types of software and different types of standards that are out there for data reporting purposes. and to make sure that these are being used. It kind of goes back to the performance-based thing where they might talk about expansion, but in this case, you're just talking about feasibility. Okay, are these being used? Okay, we got them all over our community. Some people are starting to complain. We got to talk to those people complaining about, well, I understand your complaint, but X amount of people are using this every month and it's popular. And so the benefit is obviously outweighing the problems. And so those are things you have to constantly monitor. So this is a good slide for you to kind of go off on. Other things for you to take a look at and to work on are these different examples throughout the country. Again, this is a presentation that we made available on YouTube post webinar here, and you can go here to any of these, click on any of these, and find out about what these particular communities are doing. Now, I understand Austin and Denver and Los Angeles and Washington, DC are not the size of our communities, but it kind of gives you an example of what you see at that scale and how you might want to scale it down, because you know your own community, you know your own environment, you know the people that live in your community, you are the experts, and you can work with these and figure out what would work best. And again, it's just a back and forth. I mean, every community is different, right? You know, community in Lake County is going to be community different in LaPorte County. We understand that and we respect that. And that makes us a very, makes us a great region. But, you know, the vendors will work with you on these. And so it's a case by case deal. So make sure you keep that in mind. There's no hard and fast rules from the companies. They'll work with you on it to the point where they are going to start losing money. You just got to keep in mind it is a business. So these are all there for you to look at and to hopefully learn from. And wow, we are at 11:45. This is great. So everything worked out, and we have a few minutes here for some questions and answers. And again, let me yet again let people know. And I know we have about seven. Looks like we have maybe 7 questions in chat. So we asked you to post questions in chat. And if you're on the telephone, we ask you to please, because we don't want anyone really talking here. We've had problems in, the whole Zoom culture. We're just kind of learning as we go here, but this is, I think, the best way for us to handle the questions in an orderly fashion and to address them as best as we can here in this video segment. If you're on the phone, if you're hearing this, thank you. Please email me at mbarloga@nerpc.org. That's mbarloga@nerpc.org. And before we start in on this, what I'm going to do is make sure that I am on that website right now, or I'm on my email to make sure I'm going to catch the emails coming in. And I'm going to open up the chat room now. And what I'm going to do is read these out as they're coming in. And I'm going to ask both Carl and even Lori to kind of unmute yourself so you can join in on the answers if you wish. And we're going to actually get a question right off the bat from my boss, Thomas Dow, who is our Director of Transportation, our new Director of Transportation. Hopefully you'll meet Thomas soon here at NERPC. And he says he is new to the region, or Dow region, so he's already getting the vernacular down. I've noticed a tremendous volume of golf carts or golf cart-like vehicles on city streets, especially in the beach communities and even other cities like Hobart. Clearly, these aren't scooters or bicycles. I suspect most are owned by individuals, not businesses. Would they be considered a form of micromobility? When I think that is really, that's a great question. And I believe that is a interesting and kind of a unique question to those particular environments. For those environments, the beach communities, the golf course communities, yes, they are very prolific. People use golf carts constantly, but golf carts do have a speed issue. I believe they do, in many cases, kind of exceed the 20, 25 mile an hour thing. They do have governors on them. As for micromobility, I think the word micro must come in mind here, because golf carts in some cases can be the size of small cars, especially like like some of these mini Cooper cars that are out there riding around. And one of the first cars that I owned, which was a Ford Festiva, I think was smaller than a golf cart. So I think when it comes to I think micromobility in this case are those vehicles that can be parked readily throughout a community and placed readily throughout a community. And I think golf carts are a bit clunky in that regard. So I would say no, just based on my saying there. I don't know if Carl, I know Carl, you deal with golf carts, maybe. I don't, do you have anything
Well,
to add?
I would agree with your interpretation of that, Mitch. I think, when we think about micromobility, golf carts, I think have certain ordinances, certain requirements, not just in communities but by state statute with Indiana. And I think I would look more to the micromobility almost as single passengers. So some of the golf carts have 2 to 4 passengers
Yeah.
capabilities. And then, as Mitch alluded to with the governors and the speed. But again, I think it's important to note that I would think in every community would be different than, micromobility policy and a golf cart policy. So that would be my interpretation of that too, Mitch.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. And now that you're talking about seating, I think we all have run into, if you're all from the region, you've been to Navy Pier, you've seen those 4-seater bikes that get rented out and are the bane of everybody on the trail because they hog up the whole trail. I would not consider that either micromobility. That is not a micro facility. Those are very clunky and bulky, and they're not exactly very practical either, but I digress. So we do have a comment, and comments are fine too. Don Parker saying, interesting that Los Angeles had a 3.5 mile per trip average, which should be entirely walkable. Yes, indeed, my friend. But have you seen LA lately? LA may be the poster child for auto-centric and automobile loving people. And it is unfortunately proven out that way, where you can't really get around LA other than by car, and the smog will tell you as much. Okay, let's move on. David Wright. There is an David Wright is writing here. There is an e-scooter committee that serves as a clearinghouse of policy and experience. The state and Health by Design facilitate this group. Indy and other mid-sized Indiana cities are a part of it, and GPT has been part of it for about a year. Well, there you go, David. I learn something new every day, so thank you for that. So this is what we should be doing. This is an interactive discussion, and I am going to be contacting Health by Design immediately after this to see what this is all about and how to engage more of our region entities into that. So thank you. Let's see here. And Ty said, Ty are well, that's to me, so that's a private message. It's a good message, there's nothing wrong. All right, so speed, Don Parker is talking here about speed governance on the devices should promote safety, since users are not likely to wear a helmet. What are the implications for not enforcing this? But should we expect that limiting speed may reduce usage? Yeah, I think that's a great question, Don. And it comes down to speed. And I know that you heard from Carl that there have been issues with injuries and in many cases deaths, unfortunately, from people on these vehicles. And it does become an issue if speed becomes reduced to an amount where it just become practical to use these vehicles, right? It becomes then an issue. Is it even worth the market share for vendors to be proliferating them? Right now, we haven't seen that. The scooters have now had a couple of years of incubation around the country and around the world, and we're not seeing a blowback of people wanting to give them up because they go too fast or too many injuries. I think in the case of scooters, you may have a bit more of a safety margin on them because you're already upright. You might, where a bicycle, it's kind of hard. You get hit by a bike, you don't really have much reaction time. You might have better reaction time on a scooter, but I'm just kind of brainstorming right there. So, but it's a good point. And enforcing helmets on scooters and bicycles is always been an issue. You're supposed to be riding in this state. You're supposed to be riding a bicycle with a helmet on. But of course, motorcycles are different, and motorcycles go a bit faster than bicycles. So helmets are, and of course, there are many people, and just so people know this, many people in the bicycle advocacy world do not like helmets. They think helmets distract from increased ridership for people. I tend to disagree with that. I think helmets are essential riding equipment whenever you are not inside a metal object like a car that you're surrounded by a roll cage, so to speak. If it's the first thing that's going to hit the pavement is your head, yes, you better wear a helmet if you get into an accident. So anyway, there's always back and forth debate regarding that matter.
And Mitch, when you're talking about safety, we probably need to talk a little bit about noise or the lack of noise with a lot of the e-mobility,
Yep.
not just e-mobility, but electric vehicles, and then potentially, the future of how we're going to address that in the region.
Yeah. To that end, Carl, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I think there might have to be, again, these are things that these electric mobility options have only been out for a while, but bicycles are pretty quiet as well. The traditional bicycle doesn't make any noise unless you put cards in your spokes. But for me personally, I own a hybrid car, and when I back up, it does beep because it is so quiet. And maybe there needs to be some kind of safety mechanism built into scooters and bicycles, just to let people know that they're around, which is a good idea. But again, down the road, we'll see what happens here. David Wright further comments here about equity. Equity should also include reducing conflicts with people with mobility assistance devices. This has already been seen with Bird and Gary. Okay, well, I appreciate that clarity. And Don Parker just commented a moment ago, there's a shared aspect to Micromob, and golf carts are owned and not shared. Yeah, we're not gonna, I don't think we're ever gonna see shared golf carts anytime soon. Again, I think the largest vehicles that you're gonna see shared are probably gonna be zip cars. And those get, like I say, it's taken a while for the adoption of zip cars to be embraced. And you're going to see scooters and bicycles, especially the electronic assisted ones. Those are going to take off quite fast. All right. We have Melissa Burgess here from Health by Design commenting. You could reach out to Marjorie Hennessy, our Active Living, about the scooter committee. Yes, and I will. Thank you, Melissa. And I know Marjorie quite well. We're playing phone tag on a whole nother issue right now. So I'm very appreciative for David making me aware of that. And I will say on my part that I'm sorry if I missed that in the many e-blasts that we received from Health by Design, a phenomenal partner in the state for promoting active transportation options. And there's a complete streets committee, I believe. There's all sorts of other committees and other focus areas that they work on. So if you're not familiar with Health by Design, you're on this call, you're a municipal official and work for a municipality, I would highly recommend you get their newsletter, their e-newsletter, and to be part of that as well, to learn about what they're doing throughout the state and for communities. And now, okay, here's a comment from Lori, and I will read it for Lori's benefit here. She'd encourage anyone interested in learning more to seek out their peers who've already been through this in their own communities, and to remember the key takeaway that the large cities have been most successful were those that paired systems of transit stops for the first and last mile trips. And of course, we do have transit options here in Northwest Indiana with NICD and GPTC to be the major carriers. So that's an option for us as well to be exploring in this region. Okay, Thomas Dow has commented again, stating, where are the companies like Lime and Bird most likely to place bike and scooters? Trailheads, downtowns, South Shore Railroad stations, other? Yes. How's that answer? Yes, all that. That's, again, I think it comes down to, again, community by community where they should be placed. And yes, you would most likely have these scooters placed kind of figuring out a geographic zone where they belong, in the downtown districts and connected to transit stops, obviously, trailheads, of course. And so kind of figuring out how that map works and, places where the bike shouldn't go, maybe residential areas where they should go or they shouldn't go. And it kind of depends on the residents themselves and how these smaller communities operate. Maybe the whole town is open to bikes and scooters in their communities. So it's just a town by town thing, but everything you mentioned there, Thomas, is definitely a go for the location of these scooters. Robert Fulton has joined us, and he states, what about shared scooters on state road or state routes? A state route goes through our downtown where people want to go. Are they allowed by state? I think that's a great question. I think shared scooters and bicycles are allowed on state routes by law. At least bicycles are, and the scooters, and of course the e-bikes go without saying, but the scooters mostly are allowed by the state law. If scooters are rode on or ridden on streets in the same fashion that they're supposed to be ridden on by bicycles, that should be fine. You can, state routes, the only roads in our environment that are off limits for bicycles are, of course, interstates. Otherwise, they all apply. Yeah, you can ride your bike on US 41, but again, smarter heads prevail. But you're right, Bob. State Route 51 goes right through Hobart. It's your main drag, and you're not going to have any problems with the state telling you yes or no, because again, it gets into local jurisdiction, and of course state bike laws, which prevail in this case for scooter and bicycle use on those roadways. Thomas Dow even has mentioned universities. Universities are wonderful in the case of students, and we're seeing that now. I just dropped my son off at Ball State last weekend, and oh my gosh, yes, scooters are there. The scooters are there, and they're getting the students to classes and so forth. So I think universities are going to be a prime location for these systems, and how the university and their administration works with their communities going forward. Let's see here. I want to make sure people's time. It is 12 noon, and let's see here. Again, we'll stay on as long as people wish to ask questions. I think we're going to probably cut it off as late as 12:30 if it goes that late, but we want to make sure we answer questions here. Let's see. David Wright commented to Thomas, Bird is deployed at Marquette Park, Lake Street, and IUN, but their scooters are also deployed at the major apartment areas in Miller, and I've seen them at the Steel Yard after games. Beautiful use of scooters. Sarah Nimitz from, I believe, the city of LaPorte comments, have you seen any improvements, changes to existing infrastructure needing to be made? Example, bike lane markings to accommodate scooters too. No, we don't see that. It's one of those givens that scooters, they exist and are allowable on our trails, and they're allowable on our bike lanes, I believe. But it's a great question, Sarah. And it's one of those things where it can't hurt that, again, this has only been around since 2018, these scooters, okay? And so we're trying to catch up with them. If a particular community like LaPorte wants to go out there and actually state on their, actually have a scooter logo on their street as well as a bicycle logo, I think that's great. I think that's genius level, in my opinion. It's telling these people where they can ride their scooter, because I'm sure people on scooters probably think, I can only really ride these on sidewalks. It's like, no, it goes as fast as a bicycle. You belong on the street with those things. And honestly, if you ever rode one of those scooters, they're probably better on a street, because on a sidewalk, it's bump, 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 and you feel it in your dental work, every one of those cracks you hit. So sometimes the street is a much better location for them. But the signage that gets employed throughout the community, and other types of educational materials, scooters are going to be one of those words that we're going to have to, and symbols we're going to have to start installing and including with our signage. So I think that's a wonderful question, but I haven't seen it. Let's put it that way. I haven't seen it. It's too new, and it would be helpful to see that more often. I think major communities are going to have to employ that. As I said before, when I talked about Indianapolis and all these people are riding around in the middle of the night, and all these kids are crisscrossing and they're riding on the sidewalks and everything, the cities might start being, all right, that's another part we got to catch up to. You guys got to stay on the cultural trail. You got to stay on the lanes. You can't be riding all over the sidewalks anymore. This is silly. We'll see where that goes. All right. I do not see.
Yeah. Mitch, I just want to bring.
Please jump in when you can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm going to bring one thing up about signage. One of the things that I know that we've been involved with throughout the state is with alternative fuels, especially with electric. And we believe that there's some legislation that's being discussed with signage, especially electric, but all the alternative fuels and how they would be nationally labeled across the United States. So that's something that we'll be updating NERC with, so they can share that information, just to give you updates on that. But again, with all the alternative fuel corridor development here in Indiana, that's been a topic of conversation from Federal Highway and then also from NDOT. So a lot of discussions, a lot of messaging going back and forth, a lot of discussions. So we'll keep you abreast of that as that becomes available.
Carl, that's wonderful. We do have another question from Thomas, who brings up any thoughts on how our region's transit agencies might directly partner with companies like Bird or Lime for that first last mile. That's a wonderful question. And again, it gets beyond just the transit agencies. I believe you have to also make sure the municipalities are involved, because they'll end up somewhere, and they'll have to figure out a place to locate outside of the transit areas, the neighborhoods, the business districts, and what have you. I see scooters being a tremendous asset to the state park, where the Indiana Dunes is at the Dune Park Station. People can just take off and go in there. And of course, you'd have a partnership there between the state park and with NICD. Just for one, GBTC could talk to the city of Gary, and I'm sure they have, on partnerships between themselves and the city about placement of scooters. But I believe it's a matter of the, and here it is, we have David Wright chiming in right on cue. It's both placement of scooters and bikes and making it easier to pay for rides on both. There you go. So transit and micromobility, I believe, go hand in hand, much like just, again, transit doesn't take you to your doorstep for the most part. Okay, you still have to walk or bike, or of course, many cases drive those last few miles to your home. When people talk about trails as well, people are like, well, you have a trail, you don't need a bike lane. I'm like, trails don't bring you to your front door. It looks like an interstate doesn't bring you to your front door. You need roads to get there. But same thing with transit and trying to bridge that gap. And GPTC here, again, David Wright mentions, has multiple apps, Token Transit and Move It, for purchasing, and can expand that to rent rides. So this is a great example. And I'm going to probably encourage, talk to David maybe on the side here, as we expand our knowledge base. Again, this is very rudimentary today with this webinar, and we might be able to expand on this webinar with more maybe strategic issues regarding last mile or safety or what have you, depending on how this continues to proliferate in our region. And it will, and this is why we're here talking to you today. So with that said, I'm going to close the questions, and I'm going to now just simply tidy up this presentation and say thank you to each and every one of you that has taken part in this webinar. And we hope you've learned something. That's obviously the point. And this will now be recorded and will be saved and put on our YouTube site. And again, here are the contact information. There's myself. You can contact me at this number and at that email, and Carl Lisek can be accessed over there with his email and with his phone number. And so on behalf of NERC and South Shore Clean Cities, we thank you for your time, for your attention, for your questions, and we hope to see you soon at a meeting in the future. Take care.